Hello, I'm Yifei.
And I'm Jay.
We're here to talk about Transport Canada's exemptions for UAV operations.
And if you're new like me, UAV and drones are the same thing.
Right. UAV is unmanned air vehicles, which is basically the legal term here in Canada for drones. Now, Jay, last time we spoke, you just got your Mavic.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with its performance, especially with its compact size.
Does that mean you're going to take it to work now?
Yeah, I think I'll start using it for commercial purposes, especially since the drone or the Mavic Pro is less than 1 kilo. And I don't have to apply for those drone permits or SFOC.
Special Flight Operating Certificate. Right. So basically, commercial UAV operation in Canada is a regulated industry. What you have is you can choose to go with a full-on permit, which is basically your Special Flight Operating Certificate, your SFOCs. Or you can go with exemptions if you meet with the conditions of those exemptions.
When you say exemptions, there's more than one exemption?
There are actually two exemptions, separated by the actual weight of your UAVs. So we have 43 conditions for UAVs weighted 1 kilogram or less. Then we have 61 conditions for UAVs weighted between 1 kilogram and 25 kilograms.
So 43 plus 61, that's over 100 exemptions. That's a lot to remember.
You only need to remember what applies to your weight category.
So for my Mavic Pro, it's less than 1 kilo. I just need to know 43. And then for something like a Phantom 4 or Inspire, it'll be about 61.
61.
That's still a lot.
Well, that's why you're talking to me today. See, it's all about methodology. Let's start with the 43 conditions for UAVs 1 kilogram or less. Transport Canada has divided the conditions into 5 categories, but we are not going with that. Instead, we have applied a different kind of sorting to also come up with 5 categories. We have common sense, insurance and personnel, equipment, airspace and location, and lastly, operations. In common sense, we have 4 conditions, all of which are just a different way of saying you need to run safe operations. Theirs shall not pose a risk to aviation safety, not operating in any reckless or negligent manner, ceasing operation if safety is in jeopardy, and lastly, to comply with laws from any level of government. Next, we have insurance and personnel. Minimum 100,000 general liability insurance. Operator's minimum age. There's also general medical requirements similar to driver's license. And lastly, relevant aeronautical knowledge suitable for the intended operation.
So common sense, insurance, age, health, and knowledge. Now for the knowledge, does that mean I have to go to some approved training facility to get that knowledge?
For 1 kilogram or less, TC is not asking for actual training certificate. They're simply saying that you need to be in the know. But for UAVs between 1 kilogram and 25 kilograms, we will be talking about the actual required training. In the next category, we have equipment. Using of FPV, first-person view device, is not allowed. And this is related to visual line of sight requirement. Control station and UAV cannot be more than one. Active control of the UAV is required at all times. And the rest 4 conditions are all related to the system conditions. In summary, the system needs to be fit for safe operation. No radio interference, not exceeding system limitations, and no dangerous payloads. So that's all we have for equipment conditions.
You spoke before about FPVs. Now, are those goggles that I see people wear when they go racing?
Exactly. FPV is your first-person view device. And that's when you see the pilots are actually wearing goggles, and they're operating, they're navigating solely based on the video feed from the goggles.
So we can't use that when we're using our drone?
You can only use that when you get specialty permit, not for regular exemptions or SFOCs.
You also spoke about I guess, active control of your drone. I guess that means when you set your drone on a course or fly it home, for example, you can't put your controller down and walk away. You have to be ready to take control of that drone manually, I guess, if something happens.
Yes. So if you set your drone on a flight home path, and you have to be ready to overtake that path at any given time and manually land it. That's what it means for immediate active control of your UAV. Our fourth category is airspace and location. This is a fairly large category with 17 conditions. So we created 5 subcategories for easy understanding. Starting with airspace user. We have 2 conditions describing the relationship between a UAV and other aircrafts. Manned aircraft always has the right of way, and when communication with air traffic service is required. Next subcategory is airspace class. Only Class G airspace for operating under the exemption. Then we have 4 more conditions detailing further specifics. Forest fire area, restricted airspace, control zone, and special aviation events are all not allowed for operating under the exemption. Third subcategory is airports or aerodromes. 2 minimum distances required here: 5 nautical miles from any aerodrome and 3 nautical miles from any heliport. The next one is about distance. Maximum distance for altitude, 300 feet, and maximum range is 1/4 of a nautical mile. No operations within built-up area or over assembly of persons. Minimum 100 feet from general public. Last one is locations. Location permit and site survey are both required before operations. And that's all we have for airspace and locations conditions.
So for airspace, you spoke about Class G airspace. What is that exactly?
Well, see, this is when it ties to the actual knowledge requirement. To operate a UAV, you're supposed to know the classification of Canadian airspace. And Class G is the general, non-classified, non-controlled, non-restricted airspace.
And for location, you also spoke about a 100-foot buffer zone with the general public.
That's your minimum safety buffer zone. Basically, for any aviation activities, it always has a minimum safety buffer zone to account, for margin of error. For UAVs, you're basically looking at 100 feet. What that means is 100 feet minimum distance to general public. Let's say pedestrians walking by on the public street, they would be considered general public. Extras, actors, employees that are on site who are aware of the operation and had given you permission, they're no longer general public. Our last category is all about operations. And there are 3 subcategories here, starting with pre-flight notification. Anyone operating under this exemption is required to send the following information to Transport Canada. From there, the operator needs to prepare a list of documents to carry on site. While operating, visual line of sight is required. That includes daylight operations when meeting meteorological conditions. Operating procedures, both normal and emergency, need to be established. And lastly, notification to Transport Canada for change of information. We just covered the 43 conditions for our first exemption, UAV weighted 1 kilogram or less.
So now we have to learn 61 more conditions for UAVs that are between 1 kilogram and 25 kilograms, right?
Well, there's actually a trick. Out of the 61 conditions, 40 are actually replicate from our first exemption. And most of these 21 conditions are simply expanding to specifics based on the general requirements from our first exemption. For reporting, the operator is now required to do incident and accident reporting. That includes ceasing operations until the situation and the equipment are inspected. For operating procedures, first exemption is simply stating that there needs to be normal and emergency procedures. Here we have a bit more specifics on operational and emergency equipment, specific emergency situations, flight termination system, and lost link assessment. For meteorological conditions, in addition to the visual requirements, we now have specific icing conditions as well. Airspace section. There are more details on avoiding the routes and pattern of manned aircrafts. Also specific air defense zone requirements. Equipment section. Restrictions on portable electronic device. Ban of ELTs. And in addition to the UAV equipment's airworthiness, now we have a pre-flight checklist with manufacturer's airworthiness conditions. So far, we have covered 17 conditions out of the 21. They are the expanded conditions based on the first exemption. More elaborated, but not really different. The remaining 4 conditions are what differs the second exemption from the first. They cover 2 main differences. First is training. A pilot ground school program is now required. Second is minimum distances. While the first exemption simply states not operating in a built-up area, the second exemption now requires a minimum 3 nautical miles away from the built-up area. Also, minimum distance to general public is now 500 feet rather than 100 feet.
Wow, 500 feet? That's actually a big distance. Where can you even fly with that?
Well, see, those are more of the in-depth questions. Now that we've understood what exemptions mean, we want to look further into details of feasibility. If we are to adhere to all the conditions in the exemptions, where can we fly? Those are the questions we'll address in our next video.